Can you imagine a woman being sold by her husband to a harem? I don't know about you, but could we find God in the midst of that? Hey, hello, how are you? God bless you. My name is Father Mike Manning. We have got a wonderful program for you today. We're going to be talking about, as we're moving through this time, some of the women of the Hebrew Bible, some of the women of the Old Testament. We've spoken about Eve, and now we're going to be talking about Sarah. Sarah, the wife of Abraham. Now, please remember, let this be something where it's just not my coming to you and giving this story and you kind of move on. I'm hoping that you're going to allow this to become maybe a study, that you're going to go back and as we read through the Bible, you're going to read it yourself and maybe even read a little bit more of the details than what I give here on the program. But you're going to allow this to be an enhancing of the beauty of who God is speaking to you with through the beautiful person, Sarah. Now, again, if you get a chance, if you're doing this on your own or you're doing it with other people, I want you to pray to the Holy Spirit. I want you to listen to the context, the historical context of what I'm sharing with them of who Sarah was. Then I want you to think about, how does she relate to our lives? And I'm going to give you some ideas that maybe I hope will kind of get you excited about Sarah and get you excited about going back to that Bible. Then I want you to think about, what does the Bible say to you to do? A lot of times our life and relationship with God is just kind of like, bleh, it comes to us and we're just kind of receiving this. Well, we receive it, but it should get down into our hands and into our legs and into our heart. Then we start doing something. And I'm hoping that this reflection on the life of Sarah will allow you to be able to carry out a gift or a talent that you have and allow it to be able to blossom in the world in a good way. That's what really studying the Bible is about. It's not just this intellectual thing, but it's making God alive today in what we're doing, you know. Then I want you to pray. I want you to ask God in a mighty way to come and bring all of this together for you to enrich you. But let's look at Sarah and just kind of see that historical context. Abraham and Sarah lived in southern Iraq in a town called Ur. Now we gather from the little we know of their past that they were somewhat well off. It seems they had a whole bunch of slaves and servants, and they had a lot of livestock. And they were called to leave that land and to travel a long way, close to 900 miles, to come to what we know today as the Holy Land. Now, from the little we know about them at that time, we can imply that they were very religious. They were people that loved God, and Abraham, as we know, was the one who was proclaiming one God in the midst of a world in which there were people who said, oh no, there are many gods, this God, this God, this God, for all the things that are going on. And Abraham came and he had this encounter with Yahweh, the one God. Abraham was a person who not only acknowledged God, but he was willing to listen to God. I like that idea. And I think that that's also something very much characteristic of Sarah. It would be marvelous if we could move time and again from knowing all about God, knowing the Bible, and even knowing chapter and verse, but getting down to being able to listen to God and know that there's a conversation. And when God speaks to us, a clarity comes. And so the clarity came that he was supposed to pick up his wife and everything else and move on to a new land. They listened to what God was saying. They believed in God's communication. That God gave a direction to their lives. Now, one of the sorrows of their lives, and I'm sure that it had affected Abraham just as much as it did Sarah, was that they were not able to have children. And I wonder, I don't know, there's nothing to say this in the Bible, but in my own mind, I'm just wondering if maybe one of the pushes to get away from this land of Ur, this land in Iraq, was to maybe start a new life because of the shame that came with the deprivation of not being able to have a child. That's why they left. God called them to move from their home to travel 900 miles to a place we call the Holy Land. Such a move, imagine that, if all of a sudden, without freeways and without airplanes, God came and said, hey, I want you to move 900 miles. What's 900 miles away from you? And they did that. And it probably took them a long time. It probably took them months, if not longer. And although God's message was that the new land was to be theirs, we must remember that this new land was inhabited by people who lived there for many years. Abraham and Sarah arrived with a military force to overtake the inhabitants. We don't think about that. We think, well, they came and then they just settled down. No, there was a real struggle that went on as they tried to move into this new world and this new people. One of the strong forces of the area were the Egyptians. And this is where I gave you that little tease at the beginning of the show. But in a rather dastardly act, Abraham, under the threat of being killed, passed off Sarah as his sister rather than his wife. And for a while, Sarah became a member of the Egyptian leader's harem. I mean, we talk about these patriarchs and matriarchs of our faith, and imagine that. Huh? Eventually, Abraham and Sarah were able to secure a place in the Holy Land along with their relatives. Let me read to you, if I may, from Genesis. This is from chapter 16, and it's the birth of Ishmael. Now, this speaks of this struggle in the heart of Sarah to not have children. Now, Abraham's wife had borne him no children. Now, Sarah had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. Sarah said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from bearing children. Have intercourse with my maid. Perhaps I will have sons through her." Well, Abraham obeyed Sarah. And thus, after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, and now when you say the land of Canaan, that's the Holy Land, his wife Sarah took her maid, Hagar, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. He had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. Now, as soon as Hagar knew that she was pregnant, her mistress, and this is Sarah, lost stature in her eyes. Wow, that's quite a story, isn't it? Let's see if maybe we can take the person Sarah and allow her to be able to touch our lives today. Sarah was a very complex person. She lived with the frustration and shame of not being able to bear children. She was beautiful, a beautiful woman. And she's manipulated by her husband to an extreme degree. To save his life under the threat of being killed by the ruler of Egypt, her husband says she is his sister and relegates her to the ruler's harem. although she's a woman of faith, when God seems to be delaying his help, she takes things into her own hands and sets up a servant to sleep with her husband. So we have this complex person, that all of a sudden her husband sells her or puts her into a harem. And then she struggles with God, and she wants to manipulate this fact of the promise that she is going to have children. And so she manipulates God's will and tries to bring this about. In a vicarious way, the servant's child will be her child. The servant mother of the child soon humiliates Sarah with her infertility. And despite these debilitating factors, Sarah has a sense of humor. When she's told at the age of 90 that she's going to have a child, she laughs. And even when she's able to have her son Isaac, Abraham brings trauma into her life when he resolves to take him away and have him killed as a sacrifice. Abraham's complexity speaks of the depth and complexity of each of us. Rather than admit to other person's depth and richness, it's so much easier for us to see them in simple terms. We put people in generalized categories. We don't want to admit the deep history and wealth and the variety of each person. A look at the life of Sarah challenges us to be willing and open to the diversity of people we meet and live with. I'm excited to tell you that I have a very special Christmas gift for you. It's a gift that you can purchase and you can be able to give to the young people that you know, perhaps your children, your grandchildren, or even friends. It's a story that I wrote about a little girl by the name of Anna. Anna is a person who is filled with Christmas joy, and it's in connection with her mother giving birth to her little baby brother. In the midst of the story, Anna wants to become a mother too. And yet, in the beauty of Christmas, what happens is she is able to understand that every time she gives love and care to the people of her family and to her friends, Christ is born and Christmas becomes a reality throughout the year. It's filled with wonderful illustrations telling the story of a young girl who experiences the power of bringing Christ, and there's a place in this book for these little people to be able to share their own drawings and images. It's aimed for about 6 years and older, and we're hoping that you're going to be sharing this with many young children. We're going to be asking you if you would give this gift for your gift of $7 or more. This will enable us to get the message of Anna out to many people, but also help us here in our ministry to be able to pay the bills and get things going in an even more and more effective way. Thank you very much for thinking of Anna, and I know you're going to be charmed, you're going to be thrilled, and you're going to be deeply touched by the beauty of experiencing this little girl touching Christmas and touching the life of Christ in a beautiful way. Please make sure this is something that you get to share with those you love. We're trying to understand how God can speak to us through people in the Bible, and we're going back to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. And we're trying to see, especially as we center in on the women that are presented, how they can give us a message today to speak to us of the power of God living with us today. They're not just there for decorations. Sarah is there to allow us to be able to understand how each of us can be a greater person who gives our life to God. Sarah was a very complex person. She had faith in God. She's manipulated by her husband to spend time in a harem. She tries to push and go ahead of God's plan by having her servant sleep with her husband and then have a child and then say, this is my child, and everything gets all complicated because this slave thinks that she's better than Sarah and starts to put Sarah down, and oh, terrible, terrible problems arise. But one of the most beautiful characteristics of Sarah, aside from this complexity, which is very important for us to face when we deal with ourselves and when we deal with other people, is the beautiful challenge of patience. Sarah is told that she is going to become the mother of many, many children. Well, she's 30 years old, and she's 40 years old, and then she's 50 years old, and she's 60 years old, and she's 70 years old, and she's 80 years old, and she's 90 years old, and God still didn't seem to be answering. So she kind of moves through and tries to manipulate things. You and I need to be people of patience with God. Even when our faith grows thin with waiting for God to respond to our needs, we need to hold on to hope and not go blistering into God's plan. When the answer to her prayer of becoming a mother seemed impossible, she felt she had to take control of her prayer request and give Abraham a son through her servant Hagar. She showed how we lack patience, how we want to maneuver God and his response in our prayers. And we can all relate to Sarah's frustration. A young man or woman longs to find a marriage partner, but the right person never seems to arise. A businesswoman struggles with a dream of a successful business, but the money never seems to come through. A man is convicted of a crime he didn't commit and wastes away in jail for 30 years hoping for justice. A wife waits for her husband to stop his habit of drink and drugs so he can take up the responsibility of caring for her and for the children. What have you been waiting for? What have you been praying for? Are you ready to give up? Sarah's eventual becoming pregnant offers us hope. God is listening to our prayers. And not only will he answer us in the future, but it's important to understand that right now he's blessing us in a way that's deeper and richer than oftentimes we can imagine. Think of God responding in a new and creative way in our seemingly frustrated prayers. Be refreshed by the faith and victory of Sarah. Learn to appreciate the abundance of God right now. Yeah, when I think about that, there are so many things that I want. Oh gosh, I need the money to be able to continue this ministry. I want to be able to find health with my body. And sometimes you think, oh gosh, why doesn't God answer more quickly? Then I start to listen, and I start comparing my situation to the situation of people that I see in the news that seem to be so struggling and so filled with terror and fear and struggle. And I can pause and I can say, God, thank you very much for answering my prayer right now. In a marvelous way, every time I pray, God starts and initiating in a beautiful way open doors of allowing blessings. And so all of a sudden, even in my frustration that things aren't happening, I can walk outside and I can see a blue sky, or I can feel a warm breeze, or I can even see a little dog run in front of me, or I can sit down to a beautiful meal, Or I can hear someone tell me a story that really moves my heart and allows me to be able to understand something I never did before with a greater wealth of wisdom and love. Please, be patient, but also open your eyes and allow the beauty of what God is responding to you right now is happening. Now, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about, Sarah, and I like this very much, and it's the importance of laughter. In her old age, God comes and is talking with her husband, Abraham. And as he's talking, he says, when I come back next year, your wife, Sarah, is going to be pregnant. Now remember, she's 90 years old and he's 100 years old, and it's the most unlikely thing that happened. She's standing around the edge of the tent, listening in, so that no one can hear. And as soon as she hears this, what does she do? She breaks out into laughter. What in heaven's name? This is the most unlikely, unbelievable thing that God could ever do, that I could become pregnant at my old age. But she overhears the word that she's going to become a mother in her old age. She laughs. Laughter is a rich gift of God. When the unexpected happens, we need to surrender to God's wonder with a hearty laugh, even if we embarrass ourselves and we embarrass the people around us. If ever you get a chance to go with me to a comedy, a good comedy movie, I have to tell you that most people don't like to sit too close to me because I have a terrible loud laugh and I oftentimes can just let go. And I really thank God for that gift of laughter, because we need to do that. It's a way of rejoicing and praising God when our prayers are answered, and admit that God's solution was much more than we could ever have imagined and that we could ever even hope for. Sarah helps us remember that God can be found even in the presence of life's traumas. Imagine, get this, imagine what she felt when her husband took their son, the son they'd been longing for so long, took him to be killed. This was the greatest sorrow and suffering of her life. The puzzling story of why Abraham believes God wants him to sacrifice his son certainly speaks of Abraham's extraordinary faith. Another insight that biblical scholars offer is that the story offers a break with what seemed to be a common belief in the time that God demanded the sacrifice of children. People were overcome with fear and awe of God. God demanded submission and the giving up of what a person loved the most as a way of getting protection. The sacrificing of children was similar to a businessman paying money to a mob for protection. Well, we all know trauma, don't we? The divorce, the news of terminal cancer, the failed business, the violent death of a loved one, the public exposure of our sin. In the context of faith in God, as with Sarah, we must believe that God can allow trauma to become a deepening of our understanding of who we are and clarifying the foundations of our faith that we have in God. Trauma can become the stepping stones to greatness. I'm very excited to share with you a wonderful gift, a wonderful Christmas gift that you can send to the little people in your world. Be you parents, be you friends, being grandparents. It's a wonderful book, and it's called Anna's Special Christmas. It's filled with wonderful illustrations telling the story of a young girl who experiences the power of bringing Christ to be born into the world, not just on Christmas, but throughout the year. And there's a place in this book for these little people to be able to share their own drawings and images. Please, give a look at this, would you? Give a look at the possibilities. We're asking that you would send a donation of $7 or more, in order to pay for this and also to allow us to continue our ministry. Please, don't miss this opportunity. Remember, Anna's Special Christmas. I hope that the story of Sarah has moved in your heart with the beauty of what God wants to say to you about how this woman in the Bible can speak to us in our own life. But let me throw out some questions to you that maybe if you have the answer, they can endear you more to God and draw you closer to the Lord. Here's some questions. Is jealousy always bad? We have the story of Sarah being very jealous of Hagar, who's able to have a child and she couldn't. Another question. How do we deal with God when prayers aren't answered? How do you deal with that? How do you do that? And then, when was the last time you had a good laugh? I mean, a really good laugh. And then, have you experienced trauma? And how did you and how are you dealing with it? I hope that those questions will perhaps bring all of this together in a concrete way and that you can come closer to God. And please, would you get in touch with us if you have those answers? Give us a telephone call. You can write us an email. You can get in touch with us even with a Morse code if you want. Please, go to our webpage and allow yourself to be able to get in touch with these things. We want to hear from you. And also, we want you to share your special prayer intentions, the things that are very close to your heart right now. I'm going to pray right now for all of these wonderful people, but let's listen to these intentions. This is from Oregon. This is Terry. She's having a serious problem with her teeth. Terry in Oregon. Darlene from Ohio. Heal me, Lord, from my stroke. And help me to be able to deal with give a witness to my children. Elaine from Florida. Help my son and grandson find work. And finally here, Evie from Illinois, financial help. And really needs help because of the reality of being a widow and now having to move in with a handicapped child. Lord, we need you. We need you to be present with us to move in all these people's lives. Help us to believe in you. Help us to trust in you. And may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.